Audio is now running, and we go.
Here we go. Let's go. Ready for this? Welcome, my friends.
This is Pompey Eclectic, and this is our first episode. I'm Simon, and this is
Phil,
sometimes known as Shaolin Phil, and I'm sometimes known as Simon the Cut. More on that later.
have to be careful how you say that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, we are here. Why are we here, Simon? Why are we sitting here doing a podcast of all things?
That's a very good question. Well, I decided to get into doing podcasts. Got a bit of free time in the evenings and early mornings, and I thought we'd maybe do this one, which is called Pompey Eclectic, because we were both born and bred in Portsmouth, aren't we?
Indeed we were.
And we are recording from Portsmouth as well.
Indeed we are.
And it's eclectic because in each episode we cover a different subject. And try to go into a little bit of depth as much as we can over an hour. So, how did we meet, Phil? Do you remember when we first met?
We met when we were... I think I was 17, you were 18, and we were at a place. Well, I was on a work experience placement from my kind of college type thing, and it was a company called Delarue Systems, a FTSE... What is it?
FTSE 100, yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time.
Very good company back then. Yeah.
And I met Simon, who was working there as a proper worker, and I was kind of slacking off. And we kind of bonded over silly things, and we've remained a friendship ever since.
That's right, and we spent a lot of time up on the top of the hill, sat in my car when we were 17 and 18, and playing my guitar and recording my guitar and listening to our favourite music and watching the lights over the city. Good times, weren't they?
And little did you know, I actually recorded some of those sessions from 30 odd years ago, where we sat at Portsmouth Hill, and I may have just found a little snippet. And let's have a listen to this.
Do it to us, Phil.
30 years ago.
I was thinking earlier today, crisps used to be colour-coded for flavour in the way that the blue was always salt and vinegar.
Yeah.
And the green was cheese and onion. And nobody ever looked at the labels, you just go and get the right colour code.
Yes, Walker's crisp started it, didn't
Yeah,
they? They
exactly.
got the green for salt and vinegar,
Yeah.
and the blue for cheese and onion.
And you used to go and get the wrong flavour bag, didn't you, for a while?
I did it on purpose for that, didn't I?
Yeah, and you never knew. You'd like go and get the wrong flavour bag, get home and think, oh, they're the wrong flavour.
Yeah.
And now, you know that that's the way it is. And if it's blue, you question whether it's going to be salt and vinegar or not.
But listen to this. I remember I got some Golden Wonder crisps years ago, and it was prawn cocktail flavour, and they should have been cheese and onion.
Really?
Yeah, cheese and onion bag, but prawn cocktail crisps in
You
it.
should have sent them back, you know, because...
You get a free bag out of them. They usually give you a big multi-pack probably.
Yeah, because that thing on the back, where it says it doesn't reach you in perfect condition. Then.
Yeah, but you can always just pour some salt and vinegar into a prawn cocktail bag anyway.
Yeah, but they don't analyse it properly in the lab. No, they probably won't bother.
They check for fingerprints on the crisps. They check for long edge in the baggage. And but you can put each crisp under a scanner, and it's got its own little personal number. They go beep, and they can tell when it was packed, and then they can compare the times with when it was packed and when the other crisps were packed in the bag. The crisp inside the bag and to the bag itself. And they see when they were put in if it was right. Do you reckon? Probably not, really.
So that was our golden nugget, we're calling this section, where we look back on what has come before and how we've changed since. Did we have any good reason to talk about crisps?
Not really, no.
I think we were eating a lot back on the Portsmouth Hill.
I think we used to take a few snacks up there with us, didn't we?
Yeah, I hardly eat crisps anymore, but
Yeah.
I do remember when they changed it was a bit confusing, because I remember Golden Wonder crisps, and it was, as we said, it was blue for salt and vinegar and green for cheese and onion. And they changed it round. Walker's changed it.
They did, yes.
And it was annoying at the time, and now we just, every bag of crisps you
We're probably
get.
going to get sued now, you realise that, don't you? But it's okay.
Sorry,
We'll take it.
Sorry, Walkers.
We'll just take this down if they...
if Gary Lineker starts complaining when
Yeah, and now you get Pringles as well, don't you? In the cardboard tube. That was
And Pringles
an
got
innovation.
Pringles are red for plain. Was that all? That was Golden Wonder red? I think red. I thought red was always tomato.
Oh,
plain
A
with.
long time ago. Can't remember now.
Anyway, let us know in the comments below.
30 years ago you're talking about, Phil. This is a long time ago.
But yes.
I mean, look how old we are now. Oh dear. Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
Good.
Moving on. Where do we go from here?
So far away.
Taken to another place?
Far longer than a day.
But it feels like home right now.
But there's no fear.
But everything is different.
No sight as yet. But
here.
here.
That was the lyrics from a song that Simon once wrote. And it's kind of... I wrote that even though that I haven't heard that song for years. Those lyrics still stuck in my head, and they kind of seem relevant. It might have been a load of bollocks, really.
I'll bleep that out later.
Shut up, Eddie.
Ouch.
Anyway, I think we're moving on to what's the main subject we're going to talk about in this first podcast.
Well, we're talking about Pompey history, really, and we've mulled over a few things here, but we wanted to talk about the origins of Portsmouth and how Portsmouth was founded.
Yes.
And we're going to take you all the way up to Nelson, the Battle of Trafalgar today.
But we're going to go back because I spent the last week at great expense and time to research this. And this is basically what I've come up with, because no one knows when Portsmouth, this lovely city we are sitting in, no one knows when it truly came into being. There are many conflicting facts which have appeared through uncertain means, many people trying to claim the Pompey title for themselves. But I've worked hard and I've strove to sift through this data, compiling and assembling it into a possibly accurate but probably mostly erroneous timeline, which begins way back in the mists of time. Okay, before we begin this, I just want to get into the origins of the whole world a bit more, because Portsmouth, right?
Yes, sorry.
It's
I nearly fell asleep then. Sorry.
We've got a long way to go, yeah.
We're losing listeners by the second.
But Portsmouth is a small part of the world.
It is, certainly
the world
is
at large.
I'll give you that.
The whole world at large needs to be examined, don't you think?
Maybe.
Because back in the beginning, you might know, but these big creatures were walking about. They went rare, and they were believed to rule this planet, and if you believe the stories. But what happened to them? What happened to these dinosaurs?
What did happen to them?
Well, some people say a big meteor came down and killed them all. And then humans came afterwards. I think the saber-toothed tiger was still about, but mostly the dinosaur creatures are gone. And these humans squelched their way onto the shore and slowly morphed into from mollusks to monkeys, gradually becoming the humanoid creatures we are
I'm
today.
not sure that's accurate, but we'll go on.
Okay, well, bear with me. At some point, an age of ice arrived. This would have killed off the dinosaurs if the meteor didn't. If they survived their space stoning. But humans, the ice age didn't faze them because they had better brains, I guess, and they knew how to make clothes and shelters. The clothes they wore weren't exactly Versace, but they had twigs and leaves and animal skins stitched together.
And they liked a bit of procreation as well, didn't they, to perpetuate the species?
And to keep the cold out of the knackers, that was another way. Anyway, finally, the Ice Age passed, greenness returned, even to the chilly country, later known as England, and the humans emerged into this lush land. Life back then in those times, in the lovely country of Great Britain, was mostly feudal. People squabbled in the dirt and muck, and leaders emerged to try and have some sense of control, usually against the majority of the people's best interests. Some would say not much has changed today. And I think that's enough to set up the first important point in history, which sort of mentions this land we are currently in, the south coast of England.
Well, actually, lots of dinosaur bones have been found.
So
on the coast of the Isle of Wight, which is
Yeah.
just off of Portsmouth.
that's true. So even the dinosaurs were everywhere, weren't they? Not
That's
just
right.
in like Africa and
Mm.
places.
Well, it was one continent then, wasn't it? Japan
That's
share,
true, yeah,
wasn't
because it was one big landmass and it split. That's what they say.
Mm.
But during those unorganised days, when the humans were around, there were a rather large group of lads living in a distant land that decided they wanted to take over the world. And they get a much better dress sense than the Brits, and they wore big shiny helmets
Who was this then?
with feathers in them. They looked a bit fetching by all accounts. They called themselves Romans.
Ah, yes,
Right.
we know the Romans, don't
Yeah,
we?
after their home capital of Rome, actually, if you didn't know that, and a country called Italy. I don't even know if it was called Italy then, but anyway, these guys, they were like a bit more advanced than the Britons, because the Britons at the time, their favourite pastime was muck flinging, and the Romans went on a rampage across the globe. They set their sights on England's green pastures and its vastly uncouth inhabitants. The leader of the
Nothing
Romans...
much has changed.
Yeah, exactly. The leader of the Romans at this time was a mush called Claudius, and in AD 43 he sent one Aulus Plautius over with a fleet to annex the Britons and occupy their land. Well, the Britons obviously stood no chance against this invasion. They didn't even know how to comb their hair properly, let alone defend against swords and spears. So they got conquered, along with everywhere else, pretty much. The Romans took over most of the world. And within the next few years, the Romans took over England, and they'd overrun all the South and Midlands, which they ruled over for the next few hundred years. And people were a bit cross with their new rulers, but actually, apart from being a bit strict and inventing many annoying rules, they did a lot of good. What did the Romans do for us?
Well, that's a very good question. There's, they always say aqueducts. Was it aqueducts and underfloor heating, wasn't it? With water, they had some kind
yes,
of
yes.
hot water heating underfloor.
with their
the Roman baths.
and roads,
Mm.
and it was all mud tracks.
And a lot of the towns
Before that.
and cities in England were founded as spa towns. With Bath is obviously the most famous one.
But one thing they did, in relevance to Portsmouth, is around England they obviously erected fortifications, and one such fort was placed in a good position which overlooked what would one day be known as Portsmouth Harbour. And but it wasn't just the Romans that wanted a bit of Britain. Raids were carried out frequently by Saxons, Picts, and the Scots of Ireland. You heard of them? I haven't. Throughout the 4th century, but these increased in the years after 383 AD. The Romans held fast to their occupied lands, however. With their advanced military might, they could repel even the most brutal of bloodthirsty barbarians, hiking through the hills and floating over the oceans. But eventually, a reckoning came to even the previously indomitable and smartly dressed Roman soldiers. There arose a more fearsome foe, the Visigoths.
Oh, the Visigoths, yes.
Did you know anything about them?
Yes, well, I mean, that's where we get Goths from, isn't it?
Today's
young
Goths.
people go through this wonderful phase where they like to dress up.
Yeah, and
sort
have
of
their
black
hair
and
that hangs down one
have the
side.
black makeup and everything, yeah.
And black
comes from the
nails.
Visigoths, yeah.
Oh, that's
So it's still around today.
Well, these guys are scary. Even the Romans, in their armour, quaked in their boots when they saw these guys. And the Visigoths actually invaded Italy. So the Romans were like, shit, lads, we got to bring all our troops back to defend. So they pulled everyone out of England and the rest of the world. And because the Romans were losing to these horrific individuals, England, they left the mere skeleton crew in charge. So this is the perfect advantage for the Germanic Saxons. They saw that the Romans had left England pretty much unguarded, so they struck. They struck before but failed. This time, at the beginning of the 5th century, Britain ceased to be a Roman province as the last of the Romans were wiped out or fled. The Britons, though, they also seized this advantage and grouped together and began to defend their land from the Saxons, taking a leaf out of the departed Romans' book and being a bit more organised this time. So, in 501, there's an often retold story from the Anglo-Saxon times that a Saxon called Port and his 2 sons came into Britain upon 2 ships. Yes, in a place somewhere down south known as Portsmouth. Upon landing, they apparently slew on the spot a young Briton of very high standing. Port then decided that he was the boss, and he declared this land as Portsmouth.
And interestingly, Winston Churchill, who was a great writer as well as statesman, he wrote a book called A History of the English-Speaking Peoples.
Right.
And in that book, he writes that Port was a pirate who founded Portsmouth in 501.
Yes.
And this is the warrior, the Anglo-Saxon. Well,
But-
was he Anglo-Saxon?
Yeah, Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah, so he was a warrior, and his 2 sons killed this noble Briton.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Even
But he says this was in 501.
yeah, I said 501. It is
Did you?
501.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
this was 501. But the trouble is, all this story came from the Anglo-Saxon times, and I personally believe that the Anglo-Saxon times was the Daily Mail of its time. So a lot of this story is, a lot of people say it's false. This Port guy, he might have existed, but I think it's mere fallacy. I don't think that Portsmouth was around at this point. And even worse, Winston Churchill read this rag, the Anglo-Saxon Times, maybe, if it was still around then.
So, yes, we don't really know, do we? It was a very long time ago, of course.
Well, let's move on.
So what about this fella, Jean de Guisons? Have you heard of him?
Yes, I'll get to him actually.
Oh, good.
But let's go back to the end of the 8th century first, because at this time the Britons were mostly in control, but then we had the Vikings, the tyrants known also as the Northmen, the Danes, began to ravage the coast of England. The southern coasts were particularly vulnerable to invasion, and in 787 Britain was conquered by the Danish pirates. In 838, during the reign of Ethelwulf, the King of Wessex, the Danes landed somewhere between what is now Portsmouth and Southampton, pillaging, burning and plundering, as was their hobby. The king had quite enough of this, and he assembled an army and managed to drive off the Danes at great cost to his troops, who mostly won by a bit of the old stiff upper lip.
Were they Vikings then?
The Vikings, the Vikings were vicious.
And this is fascinating because the same thing was happening in Ireland as well. So there was a king, an Irish king called Brian Boru, and he was the one who rallied the local clans together and united them against the vicious marauders,
Wow.
the Vikings, and basically threw them out of the country.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I am, although it's only hearsay, I'm supposed to be descended from this fellow, Brian Boru.
Wow.
So my little bit of pub trivia there.
Wow. A great ancestor.
Great.
But after the first king of Wessex, called Ethelwulf, kicked out the Vikings, the next king came along, Alfred. But he went one further. He built a fleet to face off head-on these chicken head-biting Vikings who were quite bloody scary, to say the least. Nevertheless, the Britons once again stood up to them and defeated the invaders in a battle in 897 AD. Alfred, it is said by some, played a crucial role in the early history of Portsmouth also. Although there are no records of him directly founding Portsmouth, he is associated with its early development. Alfred is known for his efforts to defend England against Viking invasions, particularly through naval power. He is credited with creating the first form of the English Navy, which laid the groundwork for Portsmouth's future as a key naval base. During his reign, Alfred established a series of coastal defences known as burhs to protect against Viking raids. Some historians suggest that Portsmouth, due to its strategic location, may have been an important part of this network. This early focus on maritime defence and shipbuilding contributed to the city's later rise as a major naval port during the medieval period.
And I think it's also Portsdown Hill that was maybe seen as part of the defence of the
Yes, it was originally this fort the Romans built overlooking what would be Portsmouth Harbour. It was the Normans actually who developed Portchester Castle further, adding its great keep. Robert, the Duke of Normandy, landed at Portsmouth in 1101, intending to invade England. He failed. It's believed that storms prevented the majority of his ships from arriving. But his invasion probably would not have worked anyway, because the Vikings, though they were defeated for 100 years, they'd been licking their wounds in the meantime. They returned en masse that same year in 1001, striking back with a vengeance, pillaging Portsmouth and the surrounding area, threatening the Brits with extinction.
I love it! You guys are so great!
Okay.
Thank you.
That was the wrong button. Never mind.
Anyway, for the rest of England, all too seemed lost. The Horned were actually not horned, as this was probably made up by the Anglo-Saxon times. Vikings secured all of England to the north. This was the beginning of the Dark Ages.
Nice.
So over the next 100 years, the Danes continued to invade and be pretty horrible, basically. At the end of the 10th century, though, they renewed their onslaught of the shores of Wessex, sacking Southampton. Something good they did. No, sorry.
This has been going on for a very long time, this feud with Southampton. I don't think they really care about us, but...
We love Southampton. Come on, they're lovely.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, they sacked Southampton, these Danes, and they harried and killed in Hampshire and Sussex as well. And they had this iron grip now on the British shores. And it was in 1017 that the Danes elected the first ruler of England, King Canute. So he was the first, their first ruler, the Vikings. They got this guy. King Canute was in charge. Now you think, shit, these Vikings, they've been killing everyone, pillaging. Now they've got a leader. Can't get any worse. But actually, King Canute was surprisingly quite a good ruler. He put a halt to all the illegal fornication, burning, and pillaging. And he brought a semblance of peace and prosperity to England. You know, he was a religious guy, so that might be something to do with it. He was a stalwart supporter of the church, which may have aided in this return to some semblance of humanity. He basically told all his guys, "Hey, can you stop that ravaging over there? Stop that fornication in the corner. I can see you." And he basically. He sorted them out a bit and he stopped them doing all their nasty stuff. But there were some other people that weren't happy about this. There were the Scottish. The Scots were like not happy about these foreigners invading all the time. They had the Saxons, Normans, Vikings, whoever it was. They're like, I hate them all. So they set about attacking them. Although each time the Vikings beat them back. But when King Canute died in 1035, the king's empire, which also included Denmark and Norway, collapsed in a power struggle. Canute was dead, and all the other Vikings wanted a piece of these continents and countries. So, even though two more Danish kings followed the declining Vikings, a half-British king finally clawed his way back to the throne, and that was King Edward the Confessor in 1042. Now, he took over, much to the relief of many, and succeeded Canute the Great. Be careful how you say that as well. And his son, half a Canute.
Well, not a whole one.
Who was Edward's own half-brother. So Edward's half a Brit, half a Canute. Sorry. During his reign... many said that Edward was a saintly king. Edward restored the rule of the House of Wessex again after the Danish conquered England. But when Edward died in 1066, that was quite an interesting... You're right.
Oh, I'll be alright.
Okay, I'm good now.
It's just half
This is serious, Simon.
half a
Shut up, Eddie. Anyway,
Okay,
where were we?
continue. Sorry.
All right, this is serious history. I've spent ages researching
I
this.
know. I'm not making light of it.
Damn
Carry
it.
on.
They know who I
Okay.
am. So Eddie died in 1066, which was not his Eddie, it's Edward the Confessor. Eddie baby. 1066 was an amazing year because that was the year of the Battle of Hastings. You probably know that. Is there a poem or something about the Battle of Hastings?
I have no idea.
Anyway,
Okay.
why are we laughing?
Keep going.
I've got to dry my eyes.
Good focus, right? Okay.
Okay, so 1066, Edward died, and he didn't ever marry a father or child, which has led to some to believe think he was gay. Edward the Confessor, he was a king. He could have any girl he wanted. He could say you.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it. So everyone thinks, oh, maybe he was not that way inclined. But it's also argued that he was very religious, just like the Knuts. Well, one of the Knuts, half of the Knuts.
Not half one.
But he spent it.
Oh, I was so professional. Okay, carry on. It won't be like this every episode. No, okay.
But anyway, some led to think he was very religious. Actually, he wasn't gay, but he spent a big portion of his life in the building of Westminster Abbey. So he might well have remained chaste instead of doing any chasing, or indeed being chased after.
I've never actually been into Westminster Abbey, but
Well, that was
I've been into the palace, of course, where Parliament is.
Edward the Confessor's life's work, and he was too busy to get a girl. He was into that. But when he died, he didn't leave any kids, any heirs. He was briefly succeeded by his wife's brother, Harold Godwinson, who was defeated and killed the same year at the Battle of Hastings. Eddie the Confessor was too busy doing his church to get involved in that. But anyway, the Normans were invading, and that was under William the Conqueror, which was this big Battle of Hastings. And he was like, oh, there's no heir. There's a rift filled by turmoil. 3 successors to the throne rose up, but one of these was this aforementioned conqueror, William. His invasion carried a lot of weight, along with pointy spears, so it was this leader of the Normans who became the next king. During his reign, there was great unrest and many rebellions, but all were quashed by Will's iron grip during the years 1066 to 1087. It was during this time, towards the end of the 11th century, that Portchester Castle was built on the remains of the Roman fort overlooking the south coast of England. So that was when it happened with the Normans. During his final years, William the Conqueror ordered a great survey of the country, compiled into a tome known quite cheerily as the Domesday Book. As the Domesday Book. Though Portsmouth was not mentioned in this 1086 book, Bochland, Coppenor and Frodenstone, which people believe was Buckland, Copner and Fratton.
That's very interesting, actually, because I have a map here. Well, this is a little bit later, it's 1194.
Right.
And it has Copner on it.
Yeah.
Coppenor, with an E at the end.
So, as far as we know,
Bockland.
there's no mention of Portsmouth. So Portsmouth maybe was, but these like Fratton and Copner and Buckland precede Portsmouth. We go by this data, which is quite interesting. But even more interesting is the next thing that happened. Now, King William, when he died in 1087, something very interesting happened. And this could make Shakespeare did some nice plays in his time, but he missed this one. This is a great story that I found and unearthed myself, and I may well write it into a play, and I might become the next bard. But probably not really.
No, do it.
All right, I'll do that next week.
Yeah. Phil's a script writer, just so you can
I'm a scribe.
I'm aware of that.
I want to become a bard, though. Sounds better.
He's also written a book as well.
I have. We talk about this in a future podcast if you care. But yes, when William died in 1087, his second of 4 sons, William Rufus, or William II for short, was put in charge of England. Rufus made a pact with his elder brother, Robert Curthos to rule together. So Robert went over to Normandy and ruled there as a king, and Rufus stayed in England as a king. And that was fine. But foul deeds were brewing in the New Forest. Yes, and Rufus was doing a bit of hunting in 1100. And an arrow flew through the air and impaled itself into Rufus, killing him. Now, it came from one of Rufus's own men, apparently, which seems a bit nasty. How can you fire an arrow with a coincidence like that?
This is very suspicious.
And just after this, one of William the Conqueror's other two sons, called Henry, the youngest, I think second youngest son, he's like, Rufus is, my big brother's dead. Oh, I'm next in line to rule England. Because Robert's too busy ruling Normandy, so I should be the King of England. So he forcibly took the title of King Henry. Now, I don't know about you, this seems a little coincidental. But Robert, King of Normandy, he's like, I'm going to go back to England for a bit. Came back and saw his brother was dead and Henry was on the throne. He's angry. What's going on here? My young brother's got an arrow in him and you're sitting up there all haughty like, oh, was it you who impaled my bro? And no, said Henry. But Robert didn't believe him. He got loads of his mates. Because, you see, Henry was a bit of a tosser. He had many wives in his time and many mistresses, with even more illegitimate children on top of that, as if several wives weren't enough. And he was a greedy so-and-so.
It doesn't sound like he was tossing much.
Well, and that. So Robert was like, somehow my little bro has been plotting against his own family. So he got his lads together and began many conflicts against Henry, culminating with the Battle of Tinchebray on the 28th of September 1086, which took place in Normandy, because Robert was going over to England, and then in the end Henry's like, right, I'm going to sort this guy out. So horrible Henry, he went on the attack with his bigger army and he defeated Robert and imprisoned him for the rest of his life. Poor old Robert. He was only sticking up for Rufus, but he was slammed up for 20 years. He died in prison in 1134.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but happily, after a week of illness, probably syphilis, Henry joined him a year later in December of 1135. So what's interesting?
Well, what do we learn from that? I mean, there are risks if you're going to go around being power hungry and empire building. You know, a great risk comes with that, doesn't it?
With great risks comes great...
With great power comes... You're doing Spider-Man quotes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, carry on. Right.
So, now let's get into the next bit. Portsmouth is finally formed because of...
Okay, I'll let it.
A few more kings later, Richard I appeared on the royal scene, also known as Richard the...
Lionheart?
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Richard, during his rule from 1157 to 1199, spent a lot of time on his armies, spending most of his funding on them. I don't know if he was the kind of person that, taxed the rich, gave it to his armies, or taxed the poor. But anyway, he played an important role in the history of Portsmouth. In 1194, he granted Portsmouth its first royal charter, which marked the town's formal establishment as a significant port. This charter allowed Portsmouth to hold a market, have a fair, and establish a local court system. This town also gained rights to collect custom duties, solidifying its importance in trade and commerce.
Can I chime in with a quote here from the charter? This is actually directly from the charter. I don't know what half of it means, but I'm going to read it out anyway. Get your dictionaries out. We have also granted that the said town of Portsmouth and all of our burgesses therein and holding thereof shall be quit and free of toll and pontage and passage and pedage and payage and stallage and tallage, and of shires and hundreds, and of suits of shires and hundreds, and of sheriffs and sergeants, summonses and aids, and all pleas and plaints, and of blood wit and fight wit and leer wit.
What the hell are you going on about?
Weapon takes and of pleas of the forest, and of forest guard and regard, and of all other secular exactions, both by sea and by land, wheresoever they may come, in all our lands. So, if you can make any
sense out of that. I can't make any sense.
Anyway, back in the midst of time when we started talking about Portsmouth history, if there's anyone still listening, Simon mentioned Jean de Guisos.
Yes, but this is Jean or Jean.
It might have been Jean.
G-E-A-N, it might have been Jean,
Yeah.
And I think it's geezer, because I think that's where we get this local saying, geese.
All right, geese.
All right, geese, how's it going?
So maybe that's quite important. So anyway, while Richard was sorting out Portsmouth, he gets all the credit. Jean de Guisa, he's often considered the true founder of Portsmouth, because in 1180 he was a wealthy Norman lord who owned land in southern England, including the area where Portsmouth now stands. Jean de Guisa is credited with establishing the town where he laid out its initial streets and created a small port, recognising the strategic importance of the site. The land he developed became the foundation for Portsmouth's early growth, particularly due to the ideal location for trade and naval operations. While Portsmouth existed in some form prior to his influence, Jean de Guisa is associated with giving it a more structured layout and formalising its existence as a town.
He's associated with giving it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jean, yeah.
It's good. And I've got this map here from the same era, and it's got Portsmouth is on here now, at 1194, around the Charter time.
Okay.
And it's called Portesaya land.
Portesaya now. It's called Portsmouth.
It may be
not Portesaya.
It may be Ireland rather than land, because I can't quite read the Latin style of text.
It's very indecipherable.
Yes.
Almost.
But it definitely has Cockler on here.
But someone's written Portsea land on Biro. Oh, that's you.
And Kingston, and Bockland, which is Buckland, Froddington, which I think is Fratton actually now. Because we have the Froddington Arms, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's what.
Middleton, that may have become Milton. And it looks like I can't read it. Eastney, which is now Eastney.
Eastleigh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And all the northern towns are on here as well. Paulsgrove, Palgrave, Porchester, which frankly looks like it says Parcel Force. Wimmering, Cosham, Drayton, Farlington.
Wow.
Purbrook is on there as well.
Wow. So yeah, this is the time where everything was coming together and forming. And even a bit later in 1200, the next King John, granted Portsmouth additional royal charters, further boosting its status. These charters allowed the town to hold fairs, markets, and maintain a royal dockyard, which became central to the Royal Navy's operations. He also ordered the construction of defensive structures such as a quay and a warehouse to support military and naval activities. But unlike Richard the Lionheart, John Boy wasn't just thinking of protecting the country from future invasions. Oh no, he had thoughts not dissimilar to those Roman lads and the Vikings' lust for conquest and carnage. Summoning his earls, barons and military advisors, he planned an invasion of Normandy. And in 1229, declaring war against France, the next king, Henry III, assembled a force described by historian Lake Allen as one of the finest armies that has ever been raised in England. Fortunately for France, the invasion stalled and returned from France in October of 1231. But this was the beginning of what would lead to many conflicts with France, beginning with the 100 Years' War in 1337 and ultimately culminating in the famous Battle of the Nile in 1798 and the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, which is my final bit of this amazing historical brilliance. Oh yeah. Now finally, if you want to go through the history of England and pick the most famous heroic guy, I think you can't get much better than Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, because all his life he went through. You can't imagine what he went through, even from when he was a kid. He was blighted with malaria most of his life, And he had a side helping of yellow fever in his 20s to go along with that.
Nice.
And despite all these things affecting his health, he achieved a lot. He rose up and he became one of the greatest naval commanders. Though he was prone to strutting up and down the decks of his ship during battles.
He was.
That was his downfall, one of his other downfalls, because he was a prime target for snipers. And as a result of this, he was blinded in his right eye during the siege of Corsica in 1794. He got a nasty hernia after being hit in the stomach at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent in 1797 and lost his entire right arm the same year while fighting in the Canary Islands.
And he used to parade up and down the deck because he was very courageous and very brave. And
Avast mitatis.
He knew that if he did that, he would be leading from the front and his men would follow and they would be more motivated.
Wow.
But he also had this belief that the greatest honour was to die for your country.
Yeah, and on top of that, he loved a good battle, did our Nelson. He was well up for a scuffle when on the 21st of October 1805, his 27-ship fleet came up against the French and their mates, the Spanish. 33 ships in all. They were there as part of Napoleon's plan to invade the United Kingdom. The French and the Spanish fleets combined to take control of the English Channel. And they were outnumbered, but this did not deter our Nelson, did it?
It did not.
He strolled up and down the decks like normal, shouting orders, his waistcoat flashing and weighed down by his many medals, making him even more of a target than usual. Nelson, with his ship, the HMS Victory, sailed his fleet directly at the Allied battle line's flank, hoping to break said line into pieces. The plan worked almost perfectly. Nelson's column split the Franco-Spanish fleet into three, giving the British temporary superiority.
And this was a great advantage because the cannon were at the side of the ship. So if he ploughed through the middle of a line of ships in three places, each of those rows of ships going through the French and Spanish frigates were able to slaughter the ship in front and the ship behind. So that each one was able to take down two ships at a time, which is fantastic.
Exactly. And in that ensuing fierce battle, 20 Allied ships were lost, while the British lost 0. But, there's always a but, the aggressive offensive exposed the leading British ships to intense crossfire as they approached the Franco-Spanish lines. Nelson's own HMS Victory led the front column and was almost knocked out of action. Almost, but not quite. But tragically, Nelson himself was shot by a French musketeer during the battle, and he died shortly after, once the battle had ended with the British triumphant. This victory confirmed British naval supremacy and Portsmouth as the world's greatest naval port.
Exactly.
And that's where we're leaving this amazing journey through the history of Portsmouth.
It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So
what's next?
Okay, so we're going to do our golden thread now. This is we're going to do a top 10.
Okay.
And we hope to do this in every episode. Top 10 this episode is our fascinating historical Pompey facts.
Oh, they sound good. So we've got 10 between us. So do you want to start, Simon, with your... Because I've done enough gabbing.
I do. And obviously Portsmouth is home to Portsmouth FC Football Club.
Yeah.
Which you all know and love down here. And they are known as Pompey. That is the nickname of the football club.
Yeah.
The interesting fact here is the first goalkeeper of Portsmouth Football Club was Arthur Conan-Doyle.
What?
Yes.
Really?
Famous author of Sherlock Holmes.
One of my favourite authors. I didn't even know that.
Exactly.
That's
yes.
amazing.
Technically it wasn't Portsmouth Football Club as we know it now. I think it was called Portsmouth Athletic Football Club, and that became Portsmouth Football Club.
Wow, because he did so much. Arthur Conan Doyle, he was into his spirituality and his boxing, and if you read if you read Conan Doyle's short stories, they're even better than some of his greater, well-known works. They're fantastic. I love his short stories.
And wasn't one of his novels taken as Jurassic Park? Wasn't that
The Lost World?
Yeah.
I think Michael Crichton wrote the book, so I think he must have been inspired by Conan Doyle for
Definitely.
sure. Yeah.
But Arthur Conan Doyle actually he was a GP.
Yeah.
He was trained in I think Edinburgh or Glasgow, Edinburgh. I think.
Yeah, I think it's Edinburgh.
And he came down to Portsmouth and set up a GP practice, and he didn't have any patients for some strange reason.
They were coming in like, hello.
They were.
But they weren't actually. They didn't
I
have
think
any
he was
patients.
probably charging too much. That's probably why.
He was charging a lot, and he didn't have patience, and he ran out of patience.
So he used to spend his spare time writing, and that's how he got into writing the Sherlock Holmes and other novels. But yes, he was the first goalkeeper. Another interesting fact that goes along with this one is that Portsmouth Football Club hold the record for retaining the FA Cup for the longest period of time. Do you know why that is?
No.
Because they won it in 1939, which was the year war broke out.
Oh wow, that's
Second World
interesting.
War. And of course, during the Second World War, with
There's
all
no-
the air raids and so on, there were no
Yeah,
games.
that's kind of cheating a bit, but I'll accept that.
Yeah, so we held the FA Cup, I think, for 5 years,
Wow.
until the end of the war.
Legends. Wow. I'll do one of my.
Yeah, you go for it.
This is a bit boring, but apparently Portsmouth appears on the oldest surviving route map of Great Britain, the Gow map. I don't know if that's the map you got there, but it dates from 1360 and it shows 600 towns and cities. But interesting of that boring map stuff is Portsmouth is labelled Portsmouth, another Portsmouth name, and it's represented by a single red roofed building. But I think there are a few more buildings than that in it.
There are just a few, and actually that brings me on to my next fact, which is that Portsmouth is actually cited as being the most densely populated city outside of London.
Wow.
It has approximately now, well, there's somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 people. I think they normally say 500,000 now, if you include the outer regions, but the actual city is mainly on an island called Portsea Island, and the island is literally, 10 miles across maybe?
I think,
10 miles by 7 miles or something.
yeah.
I mean, you can actually walk all the way around, well, east to west, probably in a half a day or something, a few hours, so,
Wow.
yeah.
Here's a bit more interesting news. The first centrefold to display full frontal nudity
Yes.
is a magazine. And it's believed to have been of Portsmouth-born Marilyn Cole.
I think it was Playboy, wasn't it?
Yes.
Or did
and
you not want me to mention that?
She had the distinction of becoming the only British model to be Playboy's Playmate of the Year.
Yes, so a feminist icon, really.
Yes.
And she used to work in the train station, I think it was Fratton or Portsmouth and Southsea. At the ticket office.
I don't know why they're laughing about that. That's
No.
quite interesting.
Why is our listener laughing?
Any more facts, Simon?
Any more facts? Yes. Let's go through. This is one that somebody told me in the pub the other night, so you may want to check this out from a different source, but I recently joined the pool team in a local pub.
Nice.
A colleague of mine on the pool team told me this. He said the first two-part pool cue, it could be snooker cue or billiard cue, but pool cue mechanism, so that's the mechanism that joins the two parts of the cue together,
Right.
which is now just a thread, but this was something a bit more complicated, I think. The first one was designed and made in Portsmouth, up in Hilsey somewhere, but apparently it was not patented.
Oh, no, so
then
someone stole it.
Other people continued with the idea.
Always patent your pools and your pockets and all your possessions.
Yeah, we love a bit of intellectual property on this
Yes,
podcast.
Now, coming to the next amazing fact, the first cooperative society in Britain was set up in Portsmouth in 1796 by dockyard workers fed up with being ripped off by tradesmen. The aim was to offer an alternative by organising and controlling the production and distribution of goods and services under a system operated by and for people, a cooperative.
A real socialist endeavour. Was that what has now become the co-op supermarket then, or was
That's
it
probably what's
some
all that's
generic
left.
cooperative?
Yeah.
That's interesting because there are loads of co-ops around here. Where I live, there's a co-op in each direction: north, south, east, and west.
But they're kind of capitalist co-ops. They don't give out free food and share food with you.
Oh no, they don't do that.
You
But
can't go and do their plumbing and get a free croissant.
But there is a membership, and everybody joins in this membership. And they used to have these funds where you could save money towards Christmas food and
I will say
other
that.
things, and they do funeral care as well.
Oh yeah, they do. But they do also do the best cookies
They do. We just
Possibly
ate
in
some
the world.
cookies, didn't we?
Oh yeah, I just had some today. White
Shall I make
chocolate.
a crackling noise? Sorry. Just to show our video
I
viewers.
love it. You guys are so great.
There you go.
Right. Next fact. This is about the 100 Years' War, which we briefly touched on. But during this 100 Years' War, Portsmouth was used for the embarkation of troops onto ships in the harbour and was often attacked by the French, being destroyed 3 times. Portsmouth was destroyed 3 times in 1337, 1369, and again in 1372. This probably accounts for there being so few buildings surviving from those periods. That's maybe why that map just has a single red roof building. Well, that was about that time. That's what was left.
Yeah, and then of course later on, which we'll cover in another episode, Second World War. A lot of houses were bombed and destroyed in the Second World War.
Bummer.
And you can still see the evidence of that if you walk down any of the streets in Portsmouth. There are sometimes 2 or 3 houses that are set back off the street or in a slightly different position, not part of the normal terrace. And there are also maps from that era available. I think Portsmouth Evening News published a map, which I used to have a copy of, with all the bomb sites in the city.
Wow.
I mean, they were of course trying to hit the dockyard and take out the ships before they reached the channel.
Right.
Yes.
Interesting. Does that tie into any other facts you have?
Interestingly enough, we're getting good at these segues, aren't we? So my next fact is that this is one from my father. Actually, my father used to tell this story. So, and I've never seen any other evidence of it. So if you do find evidence of it, I'd be interested to hear about that. Pop it in the comments. During the Second World War, the chalk pits, which is part of Portsdown Hill, just above Paulsgrove, it's a big white section where you can see the exposed chalk, which has been mined. The chalk pits were sprayed with oil regularly by the fire brigade to stop the Luftwaffe bombers from using the chalk pits to line up on the dockyard to bomb it.
I see. So that kind of.
So there was a Nelson's column, I think there still is, on top of the hill, and they could see the chalk pits at night. They could see the statue at night, and they would use the two to line up with the dockyard and count the seconds to count themselves in over the dockyard. And there's a fairly accurate way of lining up.
So that caused a lot of the bombs to miss their targets, obviously. And
yes, that was the hope. Yes, that they would just land in the water.
I think we should do a more in-depth podcast about World War II, because my grandfather also got some amazing stories he had. And talking about conflict, though, I've got my last fact, which is going back to the Battle of Trafalgar. You might have heard the famous line, "Kiss me Hardy," which apparently Mr. Nelson's dying words. Hardy was his best mate or first mate or something like that. But these were often misquoted because, in fact, as he lay there, his life draining away, his actual words to his best mate, Hardy, may well have been "Kismet," not "kiss me."
Yes, which we learned the other day as a Turkish word.
Yeah, and I think he did a bit of travelling this time, so he might have picked that up on his travels, because it was around that time this phrase came into being. So it could be like we say today with what's the latest yeet and all that, what the kids say, glow up and all that rubbish. If you're a young kid, that's so cool.
Yes.
Listening, obviously.
Try not to alienate our listeners. Okay.
And so anyway, this Turkish phrase actually means fate. So as he heard of his victory in the Battle of Trafalgar as he died, he could have been implying, "We won, but this time I lost. Perhaps it's fate, Hardy." What a legend. So anyway, get down to the historic dockyard and check out his ship, the HMS Victory, if you want a bit more about Nelson.
Yes, and there are many other exhibits there as well. You can get a day ticket. I think it lasts for a year, so you can visit different attractions. And there are lots of ships down there. The Mary Rose is there too as well, which we ought to come on to.
Yeah, and they even have a little cinema there, loads of stuff. Go down and support Pompey.
Exactly. So, here we go.
Is this final fact?
My final fact.
All right.
There was a Roman general, so we're going back to the Romans now, and he was called Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus.
Up Pompeii.
Exactly. And he was known in English as Pompey.
Right, wow.
Pompey the Great. And this is where Portsmouth gets its nickname from. So not only is the football club nicknamed Pompey, but the whole city is known as Pompey.
Wow.
So he played a significant role in the transformation of Rome from republic to empire, and he later became a political ally and finally the enemy of Julius Caesar.
Wow.
So although not a lot of people have heard of him, he was around with the big players, Julius Caesar, of course, being one of the greatest. During adolescence, his adversaries, Pompey's adversaries, gave him the nickname Adolescentulus Carnifax, which means, translated, a teenage butcher,
Darn.
for his ruthlessness.
Oh, so not because he cut up chicken legs.
I don't think so, no. He was, at the end of his life, he was defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. He sought refuge in the Ptolemaic Egypt, where he was assassinated by the courtiers of Ptolemy the 13th.
Is that Caesar's guys?
Huh?
Caesar, you said he was an enemy of Caesar.
I don't know.
Some salad dressing dudes.
But apparently Pompey had 5 wives.
They all have loads of wives, don't they? These rulers?
It's incredible.
Apart from Confessor, Edward.
Not at the same time, I don't think.
Or all together.
Yeah, all together. Yeah.
Oh.
That's it, is it? Have you got another one?
I think that's all our facts. I think
That's
that was
a lot.
10. It could have been less, it could have been more. But that was the score.
Thank you.
Right, wow. What's next, Simon?
That's it, I think, isn't it?
Well,
We're gonna end
I think
it.
we should just sum up.
Let's sum up, yes.
Let's sum up this session.
So what have we talked about? Well, we talked about the history of the universe, basically. No, we talked about the history of Portsmouth, didn't we? The early history of Portsmouth, and all the way up to Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar.
Oh, perhaps on a later podcast you could fill in the rest of
Yes, I
the
think we should do that.
19th century onwards.
We'll do that.
Up to modern day.
I think that could be episode 3, couldn't it? Because we're going to go... What are we going to do next?
Oh,
We're going
it's
to
actually-
do
there's
our
a-
spooky season pod.
There's a scary time approaching.
Halloween. Cue mask. Hat. For the video watchers. For the audio listeners, Phil is wearing a Halloween hat, which is rather ridiculous.
I like it.
It's good, actually, yeah. It's like a pumpkin. It's orange. It's got a big green stalk at the top of it, and it's got a black felt face on it.
Yeah, well, I live in Vietnam, and I walk around Vietnam wearing this on Halloween. They don't really celebrate Halloween there. I just got strange looks. But I'm used to strange looks, so it all
Indeed.
worked out.
Quite.
But
If you really want to see the hat and you're listening to the podcast, then you can have a look at our YouTube channel.
yeah, I mean, if you just
Of
want
the same name,
if you
Pompey
just-
Eclectic.
if you just want oral pleasure, you can just listen
think so.
to the podcast. But if you want
I love it. You guys are so great.
I
anyway,
keep pressing the wrong button. Okay, never mind.
right. I think that wraps up this podcast, doesn't
That's
it?
it. We're done.
So,
yes.
So let's let.
So yes, look out for our Halloween podcast, which is episode 2. And if you have anything to feed back to us, all positive, please. Anything of interest on anything that we've said, then just put a note in the comments.
Okay, and I'm going to let my cousin's previous band, The Exits, play
Oh,
us
The
out
Exits.
with a bit of Neon City.
Yeah, Portsmouth band.
Oh
Nice
yeah.
one.